Scope is one of the most important principles to keep in mind when you're designing a game, or really when you're doing any project for that matter. But it is incredibly hard to define what this means. Whether it's something small scale or large, I'm here to help you define what scope means for your project and also to help you avoid scope creep. But we'll get more into that later. Let's begin. First off, what is the definition of scope? Well, scope can be simply defined as the objectives necessary in order to complete a project. In more verbose terms, it might be something like the range, boundaries, or the focus of a project plan or task. And this also will include and also exclude details that may be important or not essential to completing your game or your project. Think of scope as the metaphorical bumpers or guardrails on your project. In order to hit the pins or the goal of your project, you need to demonstrate some level of focus. Understanding the scope of your project will help you achieve this. Now, when it comes to defining what scope means for your particular project, there are a few things that we need to keep in mind when we're discussing this. The first of which being main objectives for success, and also deliverables / milestones that we may want to achieve. I'm not a huge fan of using the word milestones, but for what we're talking about today, I think it fits just fine. Then the other things we need to consider are the constraints on our project, as well as possible resources we may need in order to achieve success. Now, to craft a more comprehensive understanding of what scope might be for any project, I think it's important to use the SMART framework for defining this. Now you're probably saying, Gurky, SMART framework, it's really fancy, the acronym that you used, but how does it help us at all? Well, what it does is it helps us focus on each individual step that we need in order to finish a project well. So let's go over those, shall we? What the SMART framework is it's the steps that you need to go through in order to set a goal effectively. SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. Now we're gonna go over each of these steps, and if you're the type of person who likes to jot down notes, now would be the time to take out that pen and paper and really start jotting stuff down, because we're gonna get into the meat and potatoes here. But if you don't like to take notes at all, I'm with you there. I've got you covered. We've got a GitHub repo linked below with a PDF on all of the SMART steps here. And you can just follow along on the video and then you can take that home with you. Well, you're already home, so just take it, download it, and you can use it for your own notes later. Now we're gonna start off with the first one, which is specific. And specific is the criteria that is measured for forward progression with trying to finish your goal. Goals that are specific are well-defined, clear, and unambiguous. So the whole point of this is to make goals that are unambiguous, that are easily definable. When you make a goal specific, it means that there's going to be a greater chance of accomplishing it. To make a goal specific, you need to ask yourself the 5 W questions, which are who, what, when, where, and why you're doing that thing. Who being who is involved with the goal, what being what you want to accomplish, where being where's the goal going to be accomplished, when being when do you want this achieved by, and why, which is why are you trying to accomplish this in the first place. Now these 5 questions are going to come down to you specifically and what the game is that you're trying to accomplish, what the project is that you're trying to accomplish, so you're gonna have to define these yourself. But here's my specific example. I'll start off with something general here. I want to finish creating a game. That's pretty general, so let's make it more specific. I want to create an action-adventure game with Souls-like mechanics. Now you can see the difference between these 2 examples. One of them is more wishy-washy than Charlie Brown on a Sunday afternoon, and the other one is way more focused. And now that we've got these specifics down, we can go on to the next step, which is making it measurable. See, there needs to be a way to measure progress. If there is no criteria for measurement, then we can't determine if progress is being made, and we can't actually track if we're going to reach our goal in time. But we'll get into time later down the line. And to make a goal measurable, we need to be asking ourselves some specific questions. Actually, they're not really specific questions, they're more kind of loose questions. The first one being, how much or many? Now, how much or many is very ambiguous, so what I've kind of determined is it's either time, money, or some other hard form of measurement. Hard forms of measurement are things that are easily trackable within our day-to-day lives. Thus, time, money, those are easily trackable. The second question is, how do I know if I've reached my goal? And then the third is, what is an indicator of progress? Again, these things are going to be more specific to your particular project. So think very clearly about these things because it's going to set you up for success later on down the line. For the example that I was giving, I would add on some deliverables for the project. The deliverables being a milestone list that I can accomplish at least 2 to 3 items per week on, and then also subdividing those milestones into smaller tasks that are more easily visualized and tackled from day to day. Now, if I had to get even more specific with this, I'd say subdividing my tasks might be working on graphics, cleaning up my code, making sure that my music and like audio cues time up. Those are the specific subtasks that I would probably include at this stage in the game. But for you, you're gonna know more specifics on what you need in order to accomplish your goals. So just make sure that you're being specific with how you're going to measure these things. And once you've gotten a good idea of what things you want to measure in order to achieve success, in order to progress forward, then we can move on to the next step, which is achievable. Now, achievable goals have to be obtainable and not impossible to achieve. Duh, I think this is pretty self-explanatory here, but let's go into more detail with it. Achievable goals will help you figure out the ways that you can realize your goal and work towards it. The achievability of goals should be stretched so that it feels challenging, but it is well defined enough that you can actually achieve it. In other words, don't be like Icarus, don't fly too close to the sun, actually realize what you're capable of doing. And that's actually what you should be asking yourself is. You should be asking yourself, what are the resources or capabilities that I need to achieve this? And if I don't have those, what are missing? And then the second part being, have other people done this successfully before? Now, I think it's important to note that if somebody hasn't attempted this before or hasn't successfully attempted this before, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't try to attempt it yourself. As a game developer, we're gonna have moments where we feel like we're blazing a brand new trail. Realistically though, someone's probably attempted it before, but they just haven't documented it in a good fashion. Like take this YouTube channel for instance. There are plenty of developers out there documenting their progress on making games, and they're also talking about how to organize their particular projects. Yet here I am making my own series on it. See, the thing is, your experience is going to be drastically different from other people's experience, even if it doesn't feel like it. And that's what, makes your story so unique. I could talk a lot about that, but we're going to move on to the next step, which is realistic. Being realistic about these goals. A realistic goal needs to be within reach and relevant to your project's purpose. Goals must be realistically achieved given the available resources and time. There we go with time again. We'll get more into it when we talk about the final step here, but you should be asking yourself these 3 questions when it comes to setting a realistic goal. One is kind of self-explanatory. Is the goal realistic and within reach? I think just defining that is gonna set you apart from a lot of other developers out there. Second being, is the goal reachable given the time and resources that you have? A lot of solo and indie developers out there are working on their off time. So is your off time enough? And also, do you need any monetary or other hard resources in order to achieve this? And then the third being, are you able to commit to achieving this goal? Like I said, a lot of developers out there are doing this in their off time. They probably have families and they also have social lives that they have to also maintain while they're doing this. So is it able to be achieved within all of the constraints that are happening within your life? Look at the skills that you have available and also the resources that you have around you and ask yourself, is this a reachable goal to accomplish? And the last step in the SMART framework is timeliness. Or timely, whichever one you prefer. This means that your project is time-bound in that it has a start and a finish date. This makes a clearly defined timeline, which includes a start date and an end date, and it also has a purpose of urgency. See, if the goal doesn't have any time constraints, then there will be no sense of urgency, which means you'll be less motivated. Oh, I'll just accomplish this goal later. And then it kind of just goes to the wayside. This means that your goal of finishing a game may not happen for quite some time. Now, there's really only one question that we have to ask ourselves there, which is, does my goal have a deadline? Does my project have a deadline? And if so, when do I need to achieve this goal by? For my example that I've been giving, I would say 1 year from now, I want to create an action adventure game with Souls-like mechanics in it. This is going to be a passion project of mine, which I will work on 4 days a week for at least 3 hours a day. And the deliverables for this project will be a milestone list where I accomplish 2 to 3 milestones a week. And also I have subdivided tasks within these milestones to make it easier to manage the project. Now, I also know that life gets in the way and, sometimes we have to move our timeline back, but the whole purpose of creating SMART goals is that we can get these done eventually. Life's gonna get messy, stuff's gonna get in the way, and that's totally fine. That's totally normal. I know we only have our perspective most of the time, but there are plenty of people out there who are documenting their journeys and going, hey, you know what? I ran into some flukes here and there. I know that there are some YouTubers out there who are like, I started doing game dev vlogs and then I started making a game and my timeline went from 1 year to 2 years to 3 years. That's totally normal for things like that to happen in life. So don't sweat it, just keep moving forward. Now, with all of that being said about SMART goals and how to set them properly, there is one other concept for us to consider, and that is the idea of scope creep. What is scope creep, you might be asking yourself? Well, I think you know what it is, but in case you don't, scope creep is when your project starts to take on extra features that weren't in your original vision. While additional features aren't necessarily bad by any means, I think it can be difficult to finish your project when you start adding on these extra features. So Gurky, how do I narrow down the vision of my project? How do I reduce scope creep? Well, this is where a game design document would come in handy. A game design document is used to keep the core concepts of your project in order. This is the thing that you need to make sure that you don't add on too many extra details or features to your game once you've started creating it. See, I like to separate the things in my project into 2 different categories. One is the core concepts, and then the other is my wish list items. The core concepts are the main mechanics necessary for a minimal viable project, or an MVP for short. And my wish list items are the things that would be nice for my project, but they're not a part of the core experience. Now again, you're gonna know your project better than I do, so separating between the core concepts and the wish list items are gonna be up to you. But now that you have your SMART goal figured out, once you have the SMART framework figured out, you can kind of sort between the core concepts and the wish list items a little bit easier. Now with these things in mind, it should be easy to create some sort of achievable end result for your game or for your project in the most efficient time possible. And you could always write down your ideas in another game design document somewhere, stash it away for a later date. Maybe you find that these new ideas fall more in line with the type of game that you want to create right now. The thing is, once we get to this point, there aren't any hard set rules to follow. They're more like guidelines, They're just a good way to organize your ideas and create the game that you've always dreamed of creating. So if you're in the middle of a project or you're just starting one, I would give these steps a shot and see if they juice your productivity and maybe even they streamline your workflow. There's no right or wrong way to make a game. There are only the strategies or the skills that we pick up as we go along our journey. I just hope that this video was of some use to you. And if it was, I'm glad. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again in the next one.